There is no warning. The air does not tear, nor does the sky scream. Not at first. A planet wakes beneath its moons. Children are born. Fields are tilled. Priests bless reactors with lit oils. And then, the stars vanish. One by one. A silence ripples through the void. A pause, not absence, but anticipation. As if the galaxy itself has forgotten how to breathe. Then comes the smell. Iron ash, old blood, in boiling water. The taste arrives next, copper, in the throat, sand on the teeth, a static sting behind the eyes. Vox units die mid. Servitors lock up, twitching, teeth, clacking out nonsense by. And across every shrine, every barracks, every habitation dome, the shadows begin to shift, not longer, not darker, but curious. This is not orbital bombardment, not chaos assault. This is the warp, arriving with intention, not spilling but choosing. A rift, imperfect, expanding not by logic, but by appetite. And for the mortals beneath it, there is no evacuation protocol, no reinforced bastion, no call for aid, only the long unraveling. If you value lore that bleeds, breaks, and remembers, subscribe, like, and carry the Aquila into the unknown. It began with the smallest lie a planet can tell, that all is well. Edron 7 woke, as it always had. Dawn bled across the orbital shield dome above Hive Orenthal, refracting light through the carbon mist of Manufactorum stacks. Children chased each other across the ferrocrete walkways of mid-spire corridors. Servo clerks recited their liturgies as they filed into day. The morning hymn broadcast from the ecclesiarchal towers, slightly off-key, but comforting, familiar. Even the scent of the air recyclers, heavy with mycofungus and rust, felt reassuring. There was no thunder, no tremor, no plague, no invasion, just a subtle, creeping absence, slow as thought wrought, delicate as the last word in a forgotten sentence. In the upper hive, senior Vox adepts of the Astra Telepathica first noticed it. A fractional delay in response relays from orbital stations. Static creeping into bandwidths usually sealed and blessed. At first, it was dismissed as atmospheric interference, then as local corruption in machine spirit temperament. A few prayers, a few resets, but the silence grew. Station Sigma Tertius, responsible for orbital traffic control and orbital augury, failed to report in at scheduled communion. Vox officers attempted direct contact. The transmission echoed, same word, same syllable looping endlessly like a heartbeat, stuttered, not garbled, not jammed. Echoed, and only from Edron 7's side. The station itself simply didn't answer. In the low hives, the silence moved differently. Food dispensers gave out double rations. Power nodes flickered, then stabilized, then flickered again. But it was in the public Vox systems, those ancient crackling boxes, bolted into wallways and plaza poles, where the change was most noticed. Not by the tech priests, nor the enforcers, but by the beggars, the forgotten, the idle. Because the Vox began to hum in a different key. Mara, a half-masked waste scavenger, with no eyes but ears sharp as steel shears, told the other squatters that the Vox was breathing. Not hissing, not humming, breathing. No one believed her until the Vox unit outside the apothecarium sang. Not a song, a lullaby, something old, pre-imperial, pre-hive, pre-canon. A song she swore her mother once whispered before the Arbits burned her. HAB-block. The Vox operator at Central Command severed the line in panic. The unit bled. In the outer hab belts, agrisurfs still rotated fields beneath the synthetic daylight panels. Crops grew. Machines harvested. The air smelt faintly of ozone and copper, but no one remarked upon it. Auspex towers continued their spin, scanning the horizon. But the data came back. Light. Not empty. Just less. As if someone had sanded down the details. A single ridgeline was missing, then a river. Then a weather satellite failed to remember its own name. Back at the high-altitude relay station, above Hive Orenthal, Tech Adept Severin attempted full system diagnostics. He chanted the litanies, oiled the intake teeth, recalibrated the noospheric manifold. Still, the response time from the orbital arrays dragged to 12 seconds, then 20, then a full minute. Severin opened a channel to Mars for assistance. Mars did not exist, not on his not in his memory logs, not on the cartographium globe he clutched, praying to the Omnissiah. The Sol system was their void paths accurate. Warp currents pulsing, but where Mars should have been, there was only a red smear, untagged, unspoken, unlisted. Severin severed the connection, restarted the cogitator, said the prayers again. Mars remained missing. He filed no report in the underhive depths, where sun never reached and the air stank of burned bones and fungus grease. Gangers noticed their picked feeds lagging, not slowing, lagging. Security cams showed corridors that hadn't existed in centuries. The angles were wrong. Some footage showed doors opening into their own frames. Rats moved backwards. A woman stabbed another butt when the feed was replayed. The wound appeared before the knife touched skin. No one questioned it. Not truly, because in IDRAN 7, questioning meant deviation, and deviation meant the enforcers came. But the enforcers were having their own problems. Their war room displays began to redraw their patrol maps. New paths, old names, districts marked with skulls that did not match any existing threat code. One precinct recorded an entire day's arrests before they happened. Another filed reports on a disturbance in Sector 19Z, which had been flooded and abandoned 5 years ago. The enforcers responded to Sector 19Z anyway. The gates opened. They never came back. Above, Governor Lucerne Ferrick continued his daily address to the populace from the Spire broadcast dais. His voice boomed across the hive, rich with chemical clarity, urging faith, order, and vigilance. But the recording from the Central Archive revealed something stranger. Ferrick had not spoken. He had been asleep in his quarters, confirmed by 5 witnesses and internal monitors. And yet his voice echoed through the hive, perfect in cadence, precise in policy, but off. Not wrong, just slightly, too kind, too calm. A tone he had never used, a tone he hated. When his advisors brought it to his attention, Ferrick ordered all recorders destroyed. A glitch, he called it, or treason. The next day, the same voice spoke again. This time it announced that all was forgiven, that no guilt remained, that they were seen. Something was speaking for the Imperium, or through it. In orbit, the last functioning picket ship, the Emperor's Rapture, broke Vox contact during routine patrol. The last transmission logged was not coordinates, nor request for assistance. It was a whisper, repeated twice. I see you. Spoken in the voice of a child, then silence, not static, not distortion. Silence, and Edron V continued, as it always had. Hive Orenthal lit its evening lamps. The manufactorums roared their unending song of toil. The ecclesiarchy conducted vespers by candlelight, the choir harmonizing in perfect, glassy-eyed unison. No one noticed the stars had begun to fade, one by one, as if reality had grown shy. No sirens blinked, no demons rose, no tanks rolled, but something fundamental had shifted. The Vox did not carry sound. The Auspex did not carry truth. And somewhere deep beneath the hive, under rock and memory, a machine prayed not to be heard. It prayed to be forgotten, beneath the rusted mountains of Idran 7, where the light of soul had never touched and pressure warped the metal walls into bowed groans. Manufactorum Caldrith Theta endured. It had done so for over 2 millennia. Its labor was uninterrupted. Its prayers were precise. Its machine spirits were temperamental, but obedient. Within its core lay the thought crucible, a cogitator cluster layered in adamantium, holy seals, and memory shrines carved by Martian hands before the 13th Black Crusade. It had not spoken in centuries. Not once. Not even when the Eastern Conduit fire of M41 852 threatened to breach its seal. The tech priests took pride in that silence. They saw it as wisdom. Until it began to scream. Not words. Not binaric pulses. A scream. A raw, dragging sound that tore across Vox circuits and echoed through the steel arteries of Cauldre Theta like molten glass poured through frozen lungs. It bypassed filters, crashed purity protocols. Even the holy cipher scribed in silver upon the terminals couldn't suppress it. The scream did not end. It wavered, as if it breathed, as if the cogitator was choking on something deeper than data. Magot's Everin Skull was first to respond. He had served Cauldre Theta for 89 standard years. Half his face was plate. His left hand terminated in a socket spooling 6 mechadendrites, each coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. He did not believe in superstition, only miscalibrated interpretations of divine structure. Yet, when he heard the scream, he dropped to one knee. Not in awe, in pain. It reached through every copper wire, through every blessed implant. The sound did not travel by air. It spoke in voltage, in pulse, in instinct. The servitors in the fabrication bays stopped mid. Their tools continued spinning, but their hands trembled. One knelt and began pressing its forehead to the floor repeatedly, denting its cranial plate. Another wept hydraulic fluid from both eyes, hissing and convulsing as its vocal unit issued only the word, no, over and over, no. Skull barked command code invocations, trying to override the system. It responded with heat. The cogitator grew warm, then hot until the insulation peeled from the terminals, and the prayer-etched copper filigree began to melt. Techolite Fenra broke protocol. She reached for the emergency sanctification lever, right reserved for warp breach or heretic incursion. Skull hesitated. Then he let her pull it. The scream stopped, not abruptly, not as if silenced. It faded, like something walking down a corridor lined with dead lights. No footsteps. Only the aftertaste of something that had been inside every relay, every fiber optic strand. Something that had noticed silence did not bring peace. It brought realization. The logs had been rewritten. The cogitator, sacred, sealed, and isolated, had updated its own archives. It had cross-referenced data that no one had fed it. Names of cities from other worlds, weather patterns from outside the segmentum, stellar coordinates linked to dead systems. One log entry bore the words, "They are not gods. They are children with matches." Another, "It is watching me." Skull sealed the logs. Fenra wept, not from fear, but from recognition. She had seen one of the phrases before, in her dreams. Elsewhere in the facility, lesser units began to fail, but not all at once. In reverse, a forged claw uncoupled from its host arm before the host arm detached from the ceiling mount. A piston retracted before it ever extended. Time moved incorrectly. No errors flagged. No alarms sounded. But the sequence footage, played back, made no sense. When shown to the Magos biologist, overseeing the servitor bay, he vomited into his respirator. Even the power grid began to shift. Lumen globes flickered in patterns too regular to be random, yet too chaotic to be useful. One corridor glowed in threes: left, right, center. Paused, then repeated. Fenra recorded the sequence. She converted it to bin. It translated into Low Gothic. The phrase was, "It hurts." They traced the source. Not the cogitator, not the backup lot, but an old, sealed auxiliary engine, once used to power calibration servos for the planetary defense grid, now decommissioned. The engine hadn't run in a century. Its sacred oil lines had fossilized, yet it pulsed. Not idly, not erect. It beat like a heart. Skull summoned an entire tribunal of adepts. No outside transmissions. No requests for reinforcements. This was not heresy. This was malfunction. They would fix it. They must. The tribunal lasted 7 hours. They spoke in hex code, chanting in layered data cant. Each theory clashed with the last. One claimed it was a data ghost, the echo of an erased heretic AI lingering beneath the logic substrates. Another insisted it was PC disruption. Some rogue signals slipped in through unstable warp harmonics. One junior adept whispered that the machine spirits were in mourning. No. One laughed. Skull ended the meeting with a verdict: purgation of the system core. Not destruction. A reset. Sacred protocol, sanctioned by the OMNISS-IAH. It took 33 hours to prepare. Each wire sanctified. Each cogitator blessed. Each servo spindle anointed with holy solvent. When they activated the purge, the machines wept. Not failure, not damaged sound. Through every conduit, from every pipe, 1,000 weeping voices, not human, not servitor, but familiar. A chorus of memory pressed through steel lungs. Then, a voice, singular, direct, no source, no record. I remember what you did. The room froze. The lights failed. When they returned, 3 adepts were gone. No breach, no trace. Their robes remained, folded neatly, placed on the floor in a triangle. Inside each robe lay a cog. Each cog had the name of the adept etched in tiny strokes. On the inside, Skull ended the purge. Fenris sealed the doors. No one was permitted near the core again. 2 days later, a maintenance servitor was found in the outer corridor near the calibration shrine. It had written a message on the wall in its own fluid line. The script was not Technolingua. It was Terran cursive, from pre-Unity archives. The message read, "It feels us watching." When Skull reviewed the internal chronologues of the Thought Crucible, he found one new entry, dated the next solar cycle, time-stamped 3 hours ahead. It simply said, "Please stop." And somewhere, deep within the Manufactorum walls, a terminal clicked once, as if it had just exhaled. The Emperor's benediction stood at the highest tier of High Vorenthal, carved into the spire's throat like a cathedral grown from the bones of giants. Its outer buttresses were shaped in the likeness of burning saints, their arms outstretched to hold up the heavens. Inside, the incense never ceased, the candles never dimmed, and the hymn never failed. For 426 years, the dawn and dusk chant of devotional cycle, CXLIX, echoed through its vaulted chambers, always in unison, always in reverence, until the congregation disappeared. At first, no one noticed. The hymn still played, loud and perfect. The Vox recordings registered clean input from hundreds of individual voices. The picked feeds showed robes swaying, heads bowed, silhouettes shifting in rhythm. But when Canoness Matriarch Virel descended from her sanctum to deliver the third benediction, she stepped into a hall full of absence. Pews lay empty, prayer mats were unmarked. The incense still moved, curling around the places where bodies should have been. The candles flickered against nothing. The light landed on nothing, but the sound did not falter. Voices rose, rich with age and youth alike. Baritones, grounding sopranos, contraltos, echoing tenors. No static, no distortion, no vox. The prayer lived, but not from mouths, not from lungs, from somewhere else. Virel dropped her staff. It clattered against the marble. The hymn did not pause. She walked the central aisle, robes brushing unoccupied air, reaching toward voices she knew by heart. Seer Graelian, whose scarred throat gave a rasp to the first verse. Ina the Younger, whose trembling soprano had once made a visiting confessor weep. Lysa and Holdren, the bonded veterans who sang even when their legs gave out. She knew them all. She should have seen them. She saw no one, only sound. She ordered a Vox-diagnostic. The tech adept assigned to the cathedral ran a full-spectrum sweep. No hidden projectors, no archival loops, no psycher resonance. The hymn was not playback. It was originating here, now. from coordinates that did not contain flesh. He fainted halfway through the scan. His machine spirit log recorded only one deviation: presence, unbodied; harmony, absolute; source, unknown. Virel summoned the junior clergy. They entered, one by one, each greeted by a tide of invisible voices, singing the same prayer they'd chanted their whole lives. One acolyte dropped to her knees, sobbing, claiming she could feel her grandmother's voice in the third verse. Another whispered that he could see shadows in the candlelight flickering, not randomly, but in phrasing. They tried to end the service. The hymn continued. They blew out the candles. Doff voices surged louder. They unplugged the organ. A bass harmony emerged from beneath the floor tiles. Virel gave the order. No priest ever dared speak. Seal the sanctuary. The doors, built from the bones of a martyred reclusiarch, slammed shut. The hymn dropped in pitch. Not angry, not punished. Mourning. It sounded like the breath between weeping and remembrance. In the hours that followed, the clergy debated, some in whispers, some in frantic theology. One theory claimed that the faithful had transcended, that the emperor, in his divine will, had lifted them bodily into the light, leaving their voices as proof of his favor. Another insisted it was a test, a vision, a veil drawn between flesh and spirit, that the faithful were still present, just refracted through faith. But the silence beyond the hymn said otherwise. No footsteps in the side halls, no laughter in the kitchens, no clatter of cleaning. Even the birds kept by the garden shrine had stopped chirping. One was found dead, rigid wings raised in mid-flight, eyes burst, as if it had seen something too vast to grasp. Still, the hymn endured. A full rotation passed. Then 2. Then a week. Food left for the congregation rotted untouched. The benches gathered dust, but each morning and each night, the choir without mouths lifted their praise to the golden throne. Virel consulted the lexicon obscure. She tore through Primo-Carian texts, forbidden psalms, scrap prayers left in Mart. She found fragments, stories of shrines where echoes remained after purges, temples that hummed in the absence of believers. One record told of a cathedral that sang after its world was glassed. The sound transmitted through deep space Fox on a 47-second loop, without variation, until the Mechanicus shut it down. The Magos who executed the shutdown later clawed out his own vocalizer, claiming he heard the prayers in his own breath. Virel did not shut it down. She did something worse. She asked it a question. She stood before the pulpit, lifted her staff, and asked the hymn, "Who sings you?" The music paused. A breathless, aching silence followed, the kind that lives just behind the eyes when you see your childhood home. Collapsed. Then a voice, singular, childlike, not blasphemous, not demonic, but wrong. We are still here. Virel's blood turned cold, not from fear, from recognition. It was Gralian's voice, but not from now, from before. Before the tumors, before the war, before the devotion, from when he was a boy. The hymn resumed. That night, Virel locked herself in the sanctum and replayed old liturgical recordings. Each voice in the hymn, she discovered, matched a moment from a previous life, not just earlier recordings, but private memories. A song sung while bathing, a chant whispered in sleep, a scream from a child's first whipping in the scola. The choir sang not what they believed, it sang what they remembered. She documented everything, logged it, confessed to it, in vox implored the wider Adeptus Ministorum for audit. No answer came, not silence, just absence. The astropathic line was open, the channel stable, but the cathedral's signal was now marked as unresolved origin, as if it had never been mapped, as if it had never existed. On the 9th day, Virel entered the sanctuary, alone. She sat in the first pew, and the hymn shifted. Every voice called her name. Over and over, not praise, Not blame, just presence. When the junior clergy found her the next morning, Varel was gone. Her robes lay folded across the pulpit. Her staff stood upright, untouched. No disturbance, no breach. The hymn continued, one voice louder. They say it now includes her laugh. Not the one she used as canonis, the one she used as a child, on a world no longer listed in imperial records. The choir is still singing, and somewhere beneath the altar, a vox unit, without wires, ticks softly. It is not connected to anything, but it is recording. The sky broke at 2:14, locals, but no one saw it happen. There was no flare, no blinding surge, no chromatic bleed, only absence, as if something vast and ancient had reached through the fabric of the void, not to tear it, but to unmake its purpose. One of the moons vanished first, then the stars around it dimmed, not as if blocked, but as if they had never been lit. Observers did not panic. They blinked, recalibrated. Scopes, refreshed data feed. Machines still logged coordinates, still pinged responses, but what they returned was hollow, not empty, meaningless space. Shadow without source, form without presence. The event began over Idrin, the 7th southern hemisphere, where atmospheric activity was already irregular. Weather stations recorded no deviation, but PIC scans taken from 2 separate continents revealed identical anomalies. A thin vertical column, blacker than shadow, splitting the sky like a wound that refused to bleed, not expanding, not shifting, just waiting. Then came the bending dot. Light, as understood by human physics, behaves predictably. Even warp disruptions tend to ripple colors, fracture, surfaces shimmer, edges blur, but this rift did something worse. It inverted reflection. Shapes cast shadows in the wrong direction. Glow globes and habitation blocks lit everything except the objects nearest them. People stared at each other and saw outlines, but no substance, like watching someone through a dream of them. At first it was subtle, then maddening. The planetary observatorium at Zenith 9 logged 3 full minutes of perfect dark, where the sun should have risen. Their timepiece confirmed dawn, their systems aligned, their solar arrays extended. But above them, only the rift remained. A vertical scar stitched into the dome of the heavens. Magos optic V's, Eridane, attempted spectrum capture using a solar prism coil. The device returned a not black, not void. A measurement so absent that it broke the coil's capacity to display values. The diagnostic page read only, perception failure. By the end of the hour, entire sectors had noticed. Children cried at reflections that didn't follow them. Pilots abandoned sky lanes as their uspecs returned triple echoes, one above, one below, one beside the vessel, where no surface could be. Vox signals refracted through themselves. A single call sent from Hive Orenthal bounced off the edge of Hive Clivos, 300 kilometers away, passed through the Manufactorum belt, and returned to the center with a 5-second delay, spoken in their own voice, but different, slower, as if considering what had just been said. By noon, half the planet had gone dim, not from storm, nor orbital shield failure, but from angle distortion. The light from the sun still reached the world, but bent away from where it was needed. Shadows fell upwards. The sky no longer ended at the horizon, but wrapped downward in a slow, spiraling curve, and at its center the rift. Still no glow, still no demon, still no fire, but something was wrong with time. At the Ordo Chronos, sub-listening post, embedded within the Librarium, the timekeepers began to stutter. Their breath did not match their heartbeat. One acolyte was recorded blinking 17 times in the space of a second, his pupils dilating in inverse rhythm to the temple's main chronometer. When asked the date, he said, "Before," and collapsed. Later, they found out he had been born during that moment. In the southern continent of Varix's reach, geocartographers began receiving contradictory data. Mountain ranges plotted in triplicate, rivers flowing uphill on one map, frozen on another, absent on a third, all from the same survey pass. The Imperial Cartographium declared it a data collision, the result of solar interference. But one of the maps showed a city that hadn't existed in 9 centuries perfectly intact, its streets named, its lights flickering. When a drone was dispatched to investigate, it found nothing, and then something, and then nothing again. It returned with footage of what appeared to be a civic, paradrobed figures walking backward beneath banners marked with the planetary governor's seal, except the seal was wrong. It bore the twin-headed Aquila, yes, but with 3 eyes, one set in the center of the forehead, a mutation, a heresy yet rendered in perfect ecclesiarchal style, as if it had always been that way. The drone stopped transmitting mid-frame. Its last image was of the sky, viewed from within the lost city. The rift hung above, wider now, not in size, in influence. Because the contradictions were spreading, in Hive Orinth, residents began reporting doubled space. Hallways that should have ended in loading bays now led to new districts. Elevators took longer to descend, but traveled the same distance. The same Voxcaster broadcast 2 versions of the same sermon, one invoking the god Emperor, the other praising a figure called the Custodian of the Fold, a name no Imperial archive recognized. Clocks still ticked, but they ticked in 3s. 1 click forward, 1 click still, 1 click back. People began counting their own memories aloud, trying to anchor themselves. Some realized they had lived through the same day twice, word for word. Others saw loved ones acting out gestures from dreams they hadn't yet had. One young girl etched a drawing into a wall of a black sun with a halo made of hands. When asked what it was, she said, "It's where the night comes from." The Adeptus Mechanicus attempted to triangulate the rift's dimensional edge. They never finished the calculation. Half the instruments returned negative dimensions measurements that implied space within space. Folds of reality compacted into layers smaller than atoms, but vast enough to contain cities. The High Vox of the Ecclesiarchy ordered all citizens to face away from the rift during prayers. He claimed its gaze disrupted piety. Within hours, his own eyes turned milky. He began speaking in Low Gothic backwards, every sentence ending with his own name. He was found humming no tune just potential, and always in the direction of the sky. By the end of the 3rd cycle, Idrin 7's moon reappeared, but it cast no shadow. It did not move. Its surface shimmered, as if submerged. Long-range Auspex scans returned, echoes of screaming that registered not as sound but as pressure, like something pushing against the world from a direction that had no bearing. People whispered now, not in fear, in politeness, as if something had entered the room and they didn't wish to offend it. And above them, the rift widened, not as a tear, but as a hunger, not for flesh, for shape, for sequence. Hive Orenthal always moved, not just in the hum of conveyors or the grind of magrail lifts, but in the slow pulse of population and purpose. Thousands of kilometers tall and layered in strata of industrial life, it was a city with memory. Whole generations lived and died in its shadow without ever seeing the sky. Streets turned familiar, not because they were known, but because they never changed. Until they did, it started in the mired cincture sector for B. Lower mid-hive where a transit tram vanished between stations. Routine, not unheard of. Machinery failed. Sabotage happened. But when Magrail Car 190 Theta didn't arrive at its destination and didn't return to origin, the transit logs looped. Not error, not missing, just looped. Arrival recorded, no departure. Then a reverse departure, logged 2 minutes after arrival. Then again. When inspectors attempted to walk the tracks, they arrived back at their starting point without turning, without stopping. One of them vomited when he realized his boots were clean. despite walking 20 minutes through ash-licked tunnels. Another noticed his auspex still showed 0. Distance traveled, and then the passengers started walking in. From nowhere. They weren't in the tram. They simply entered the station. Each one looked confused, eyes unfocused. All of them muttering similar phrases. I was already here. I think I left twice. I opened my front door and saw the station. One woman insisted she had kissed her husband goodbye in their hab chamber and stepped into their washroom, only to walk out into platform 9, still holding her towel. Administrative officials assumed a warp echo. They set up perimeter wards. The next day, the wards looped too. Walking the boundary brought enforcers back to the place they started, without retracing steps. Mapping drones went blind after their third directional ping. Their logs recorded overlapping coordinates, all centered on one phrase: "You have arrived." It spread. Habs began to rearrange themselves. Citizens opened bedroom doors to find market stalls. Elevators descended but arrived 3 floors higher. A preacher delivering his sermon in the chapel of St. Basil appeared an hour later, delivering the same sermon word for word on the far side of the hive, in a district he'd never visited. He didn't recall the first speech, but security footage showed him clearly, preaching with identical gestures, identical tone, identical sweat stains on his robe. Someone painted a sigil on a wall in blood, a circle eating its tail. It was removed within the hour. 3 more appeared the next day, then 10, then none, then the wall itself disappeared. The hive tried to compensate. Arbites deployed route patrols. The Mechanicus issued recalibrated The ecclesiarchy demanded absolute stillness during prayer hours, but the hive no longer obeyed. Not physically, not mentally. The people changed. A child was found curled beneath a stairwell, eyes wide, muttering, "I lost the hallway." It ran. Her mother said they had lived in the same corridor for 10 years, but the child's drawing scratched onto the wall with a broken data slate showed a map no one recognized. A spiral of rooms nested within rooms, with a single word at the center: "Here." Multiple citizens began to speak in Miragothic normal syntax, but reversed phonetically. It took time to decipher. Their phrases were strange. "You will be remembered before you arrive." The road home is the road back to forgetting. I passed myself and didn't wave. One of them drew a door in chalk on the wall of the Hab Minister's office. When he returned the next morning, the chalk was gone. The door wasn't. It opened. The records do not state what lay beyond, only that the minister never returned. The city had become recursive, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, a closed loop of space, time, and memory feeding itself. Surveillance picked feeds, recorded pedestrians passing themselves in real time. A man exited a lift, entered a corridor, and 2 minutes later, passed by his own prior frame without seeing himself. The hallway had cloned the moment, or perhaps folded it, like a ribbon pressed too tightly around a fixed axis. Magos Geodesius sent a survey team to plot fixed architecture. They failed, because the walls weren't moving. They were deciding. One tech adept removed a panel to trace power lines. Beneath it, not conduit, but air. The wall was hollow, but echoed like a throat. When uspexed, it returned biological readings. But when biopsied, the substance crumbled to dust, then reformed. In the shape of another wall, a new door appeared in Central Bastion. It bore the sigil of the Administratum, but distorted 2 quills crossed like a noose. Inside was an office, a desk, a terminal. The terminal displayed a personnel file for an official who had never been born. The logs were complete dates, assignments, crimes, even the cause of death, lost in transit between self and self. The hive no longer followed order. It mimicked it, echoed it, and then forgot it. Maps changed daily. Names reverted to older dialects. One district began referring to itself as the Return, another as the Always. No one remembered renaming them. Even Thoughts began to loop. Citizens filed the same. Requests for aid multiple. Times word forward, intonation matched. Down to tears and timing. One enforcer realized he had heard the same plea 3 days running from the same man, with the same breath. When asked, the man simply said, "I am trying to leave." But there was nowhere to go. Because every road led back, not just in space, but in identity. Files began to duplicate. Birth records listed individuals born twice years apart, with matching faces. A pair of lovers swore they'd only just met, but picked feed showed them in intimate contact a decade ago. A pair of twins petitioned for dual relocation, lay to discover that neither had a birth record. No parents, no designation. Their names were fragments of each other, scrambled, incomplete. They stopped speaking soon after. The hive folded further. Public squares shrank. Corridors narrowed. Buildings now had more interiors than exteriors. Windows faced brick walls that didn't exist outside. One day, every stairwell in subsector J descended to the same floor, no matter where it began. The people called it the swallowing. They whispered it, not in fear, in apology. By the cycle's end, Hive Orenthal no longer obeyed Imperial Jew. The Ordo Cartographica issued a red designation, auto-cannibalistic structuration hostile geometry, meaning the city consumed not only its layout, but its intent. A structure that no longer served its citizens. A structure that no longer believed it had citizens. Somewhere beneath the looping grid, a voice was recorded in a forgotten lift shaft. One word, whispered across 16 different Vox frequencies, all layered on top of one another. Welcome. Then nothing. Not silence, repetition, and above it all, the rift still hung. Not wider, just closer. They called the outpost Bastion Row 77. Or maybe it was Kappa Black. The designation changed depending on who you asked, and how long it had been since they'd last checked the wall. No one was sure anymore. The paint peeled faster than they could repaint it. Signs rusted before they were read. Maps redrew themselves in the minds of the officers trying to use them, but the Astra Militarum still held the line, because that was what they were told to do. At least, that's what the journal says. It's a thin book. Regulation issue field journal. Standard to every guardsman assigned to outer defense. Black cover, red Aquila. Inside, the ink begins strong thick lettering, organized timestamps, neat notes. Then something shifts. The words stumble. Sentences break. Some entries are dated twice, others not at all. Then the handwriting changes, then changes again. There is no name on the cover. No regimental code, just the first page. I think my name was or it was given to me, or I gave it to someone else. I held it in my mouth like a prayer I didn't understand. The guardsman had once served with the 902nd Idrani Line Infantry. He had seen off-world deployment during the Filtrax cleansing, survived a tunnel collapse on Gathus Prime, and received a citation for stabilizing wounded during a warp storm evac. All of this is written in the first few pages. Then, abruptly, the journal states, I woke up with a lasgun in my hand, and no reason to hold it. From that point on, it becomes a record of loss. Not of comrades, not of territory, but of self. He writes of standing post for hours, watching nothing move, while forgetting whether he's on guard duty or returning from it. He describes the faces of fellow guardsmen becoming harder to remember, not just names. One man he eats with daily is described only as the one with the eyes that don't agree. Another is the sergeant, probably. In one entry, they gave us new tags. Blank said it was a printing error, but none of us remembered what the old ones said, so we wore them anyway. In another, I think I used to have a family. I remember a song, not the words, just the idea of one. Across the journal, the lasgun becomes a character. Early entries describe it as my weapon, then simply it, then the thing I hold when I remember to. Eventually, He begins asking it questions. Not out loud, just in ink. What do you want me to shoot? Are you the reason I'm still awake? Do you remember me better than I do? By the time he writes the 37th entry, he refers to himself in third person. The guardsman saw something in the mist today. He no longer claims authorship of his own life. He describes fog rolling in from the south perimeter, fog that doesn't behave. It comes at the same hour each night. It doesn't disperse. Auspex fails within it. Once, a recon team walked into it. Only one returned, with burn marks across his eyes, and the words, "They called me," etched into his skin with his own blade. He was sedated. His chart listed him as unclaimed. The guardsman records this without reaction. I think he was my friend. Maybe. He laughed once. That felt real. He begins seeing structures in the distance, observation towers that do not exist, bridges spanning chasms not listed on any map. He climbs one such tower. The stairs ascend far too long, longer than the structure could possibly support. At the top, he finds a mirror. There is no reflection. He writes, "It didn't scare me. It just confirmed something I already suspected." Later entries grow erratic. He finds another journal. It matches his own, word for word. Only the handwriting is different. He does not know whose it is. He buries it. Then, the weather changes. Not colder, not warmer. Wrong. Rain falls in patterns. Every drop lands in sequence. His helmet records a rhythm: 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, repeat. He writes it down, cross-references with Morse code, finds no match. But the phrase forms in his head: "You are not alone, even when you're wrong." He stops trusting his senses. I watched a flame burn upward, then inward. It ate itself, like the city does, like we do. He stops eating regularly, not from despair, from confusion. He no longer knows whether he has already eaten or will eat later. Taste becomes irrelevant. Food packets arrive with no labels, only expiration dates that rewrite themselves. One entry reads, "I forgot what sleep means. I close my eyes, but the dark behind them feels like it's watching back." He begins having dreams or something close. In them, he's always holding the lasgun. Sometimes it's made of bone. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it points itself. Once, it's heavier than a tank, and he cannot put it down. He drags it behind him, and it whispers, "They will name you when you're gone." Then the dreams stop. He forgets what they were. The entries become shorter. Day 63, woke up. Day 64, held it again. Day 65, there was someone else, maybe. Day 66, fog again. Talked to me this time. Asked if I knew what forward meant. Then, near the final pages, something returns. A long entry, clean writing, coherent thought. I sat by the perimeter fence and watched the sun rise in 4 directions. I think it was the same sun. I think the sky bent to accommodate it. I still held the lask. I think it remembers me. I tried to say the oath again, the one we learned in training. Couldn't. Words were gone. But I knelt anyway. I looked at the fence. No enemy, no war. Just the sound of a world folding inward. I think we lost. I think we won. I think the difference is too small to feel anymore. Then, if anyone finds this, I was someone. I think I was sent here. I think I served. I think the final page is torn, not removed. Torn, as if something had gripped it, not with fingers, but intention, and taken the last word away. The journal was found buried in a supply crate, mislabeled water, filters. No such filters were recorded. No name could be traced to the serial number and bastion, rows of 97 or Kappa. Active. The men still stand. Post. Their tags remain blank, and somewhere in the barracks, a guardsman sits in the dark, holding something he doesn't remember, choosing. The first fractures appeared under the northern plate shelf, minor, non-seismic, a tremble mistaken for routine pressure. Shifty Drensevin's crust had always been cantankerous. Plate movement was expected, even welcomed by the geological corps who monitored fault lines as part of Prometheum harvest protocols. But what rose from beneath the crust was not pressure, it was structure. A ridgeline once catalogued as inert basalt cracked lengthwise during a survey drill, revealing a smooth curve beneath the stone. The rock didn't shatter it, peeled, like dried flesh curling off muscle. Beneath it lay something pale, ridged, and jointed. The surface red as calcium but, with internal latticework far too ordered, too deliberate. One geologist called it a load-bearing femur, the size of a valley. He was laughed out of the outpost. The next morning, he was gone. Only his gloves remained, laid gently across the scanner bed, as if placed by hands that understood reverence. In the weeks that followed, satellite imagery began to conflict. Mountain chains shifted orientation between orbital passes. Ravines deepened without erosion. Some forests curled inward, forming spirals visible only from the stratosphere. And then came the hills' perfect hemispheres that grew where flatlands had once been, not in clusters. In symmetry.topographers mapped them, named them, cross-referenced with ancient logs. None existed before. All appeared within 48 hours. When scanned, they emitted no thermal signature. No fauna nested there. No wind passed over them. When a wind did blow, it bent around the hills as if repelled, not displaced, denied. Beneath one, a team drilled 17 meters and they hit cartilage. Biological dense, it flexed under pressure, then retracted. Machinery jammed. Drill heads melted. The noise that followed draw low and pulsating was recorded but untranslatable. Not vibration, not seismic, not audible. But the team heard it, felt it. One described it as the sound of being judged before birth. He died the next day, heart ruptured. Autopsy revealed no cause, only one anomaly. His bones were marked with tiny ridge-etched rings, like growth markers. Each one matched a seismic event logged from the rift. Every bone. Elsewhere, rivers stopped flowing their natural paths. Instead, they bent and merged, pooling into what cartographs recorded as an ocular depression. A lake, nearly perfect in shape, surrounded by soil rich in phosphorus. Its center glowed faintly beneath moonlight. A perfect circle, dark at the middle. When viewed from orbit, it resembled an eye. A week later, a second lake formed opposite it. One picked sat captured the entire northern quadrant. What it showed was unmistakable. A face, not sculpted, not built, formed at the ranges, were ridged like brows. The valleys traced the lines of cheek and jaw. The rivers marked scars. The plateaus formed lids that never blinked. And the lakes those new black hollows watched. Seismologists attempted denial. Geological coincidence? Pattern projection? Pareidolia? But the scan data would not support their certainty. Subsurface echo mapping revealed arching tendons of mineral tension connecting tectonic plates like ligaments. Stress points aligned like joints. One cavern network even displayed wave patterns that, when amplified and run through audio modeling, formed pulses akin to a heartbeat.geo. Synchronization failed the next day. The entire planet's crust shifted by 0.17 degrees without triggering seismic alerts. It did not crack. It realigned, and still, the surface changed. Hills curled inward, forming spiral trenches that radiated heat only detectable in dreams. Several surveyors woke with nosebleeds, vomiting equations they could not remember learning. One wept while reciting names. When asked whose names, he said, "Landmarks. I think they used to be landmarks." He died before they could test him. In the eastern hemisphere, a mountain collapsed into itself without impact or detonation. The footage showed it folding not, falling, its peak turning inward, like a mouth closing. Beneath it, an abyss opened, rimmed with spires that had not been there the day before. Not rocks, not structures, teeth, 5 kilometers wide, worn down, fossilized, but unmistakable. The Mechanicus attempted reclamation. They sent skittery units into the rift, equipped with sacred aspects and audioseal helms. They advanced for 49 minutes. Then all feeds cut out. No interference, no resistance, just blank. When the Mechanicus tried to retrieve the footage, they found it had never been recorded. The timestamp files remained, but the content was gone, as if the memory itself had been digested. Of the 12 skittery who entered, 3 returned, but not together. One was found walking west along a salt flat, weapon fused to his arm. His faceplate was shattered inward, but he did not bleed. When removed, his skull was bare, clean, polished. The second was buried beneath a landslide, armor rusted, circuitry intact. His core recording unit played the same 3 words in loop. It recognizes terrain. The third was not found at all, only a footprint, 30 meters long, shaped like a boot, a skittery boot, left side only, no pressure pattern, no origin, just one step. Perfectly preserved. After that, the Magos classified the zone, declared it incompatible with logic, declared the planet in metamorphosis, not chaos-born, not demonic, but responsive, a world, reconfiguring to mirror something, not someone. Something. Vox-logs from outlying agrisep began to include chants never taught, rhythmic murmurs spoken during sleep, words that matched ridges appearing on new terrain, every syllable a contour, every phrase a peak or trench. Language forming geography, or geography giving birth to language? Impossible to tell. Eventually, all attempts to map the surface failed. Drones sent skyward spun in circles, disoriented by false horizons. When retrieved, their memory cores showed terrain folding in on itself, mountains swallowing deserts, rivers dissolving into solid rock, forests collapsing into the shape of a hand. One drone's footage ended with a blinking phrase across its interface: "This is not your ground." That drone no longer exists. Its metal degraded to powder in under an hour. The powder tasted like salt and copper. The ground beneath Hydron 7 is no longer stable. Not because it moves, but because it listens, because it waits, because it remembers what it was never meant to be. And in the deep crust, beneath rock older than the Imperium, a shape stirs, not to rise, but to finish forming. The first data slate arrived without transit code. It appeared on a command lectern inside Orbital Control Tower, Omega Prime, mid-shift, between 2 cups of recaf and a prayer-etched OSPEX calibration spool. No courier, no transmission alert. The lectern's proximity log listed no entry. The tower's void locks remained sealed. The data slate simply was a standard issue unit, polished, charged, sealed in red wax, stamped with the Achille and something else, not a seal recognized by the Adeptus Administratum. A stylized I, horizontal, S-L-I-T-T. One of the adepts peeled the wax and accessed the contents. The orders within were concise, precise, authoritative. A sector-wide elevation of alert level to seek. All communications with Idrin V surface were to be suspended until further notice. No dropships were to breach it. No psyker contact authorized. No inquiries permitted. Signed by High Lord Tiber Hall. X. The problem: no such High Lord existed. The Senatorum Imperialis maintained rigid record-keeping. There was no helic, not on Terra, not on any sanctioned organ of authority. The Administratum cross-referenced 37 systems. No match, no proxies, no precedent. Worse, the orders were dated 3 days in the future. Initial assumption was heretical forgery. The slate was sealed and quarantined for analysis, but it didn't remain there. The next shift, a second slate appeared, this time in the hands of Adept. Sivon clutched to her chest as she walked into the communications chamber, pale and whispering. She claimed she'd found it in her cot. It bore her own handwriting, a full page of authorization codes. She had no memory of writing each code verified, each line formatted in perfect Administratum rhythm. The orders beneath the header were chilling. Begin redundancy, dispersal of personnel, localize all decision-making chains, prepare for executive fragmentation, do not seek confirmation. The Emperor already knows. Signed Sivan. Title listed, the one who was not chosen. No rank, no branch, just that. She wept while handing it over, not from fear, from recognition. In the days that followed, more slates surfaced, dozens, each bearing different instructions. Many directly contradicted one another. One ordered a full blockade of Idrin V, another commanded open approach and resource extraction. A third declared the planet non-vital and recommended evacuation of all command structures. One simply read, "Let it finish." The seals varied. Sombor non symbols, adeptus arbicis, monitorum, ordo hereticus. Others were alien to all archives. A cog split down the middle, a torch with 7 flames. One, disturbingly, was marked by a handprint, not embossed, but burnt into the surface. DNA trace inconclusive. Surface temperature readings classified. Panic brewed in silence. Authority collapsed by degree. Each rank began to receive their own slates, not publicly, privately left on pillows. Locked in lockers they themselves had sealed. Slid beneath doors no one had approached. Some slates issued new chain of command directives, altering leadership structure without precedent. One senior adept awoke to find herself demoted. Her duties transferred to a junior initiate whose only qualification was pattern compliance. When she protested, she was shown a slate signed in her own blood. She remembered writing it, but not why, not when, not who she had been then. In response, a lockdown was attempted. Slates were banned. All communications routed through verbal relay only. Vox units filtered. Encryption protocols refreshed hourly, but the slates kept coming. One appeared inside a sealed servo skull, another embedded in the blood of a slain enforcer. Letters imprinted on subdermal tissue in Gothic script. A tech priest discovered one within his own data coil, a digital slate etched into the threads of his memory storage, unremovable. He began speaking in commands he did not understand. One phrase repeated, "I am still him." The situation deteriorated further when messages began contradicting themselves. A data slate would open to one order, then shift to another when read. An example. Initial, deploy Legio Auxilia to Hive Orenthal. Suppress instability. Revised. There is no Hive Orenthal. Do not pursue mythic geography. The date remained unchanged. The signature remained unchanged. Only the reality differed, and the signatures grew stranger. One slate bore the name Morn Directive. Another was simply signed post-witness. A third was signed with no name at Oloni, a fingerprint spiraling inwards. Analysts attempted to trace the slate origins. They failed. One attempted to write over a message. The slate bled from the edges. The analyst has not spoken since. Even the cogitators turned unreliable. Adept Tanvik discovered that each time he logged into the central processing terminal, a new message awaited him, always unsigned. Always the same words. Your decision has already been accounted for. Eventually, he stopped logging in. By this point, no one trusted orders. No one trusted chain of command. Vox communications were fragmented. Every directive carried the stain of doubt. Was this from command? Or from something pretending to be command? Paranoia fractured command structures. One officer publicly destroyed a slate, then executed her second-in-command for acknowledging it. Another gave an entire company the day off after receiving a slate that read, "This day has already happened. Rest now." They all complied. No one remembered doing so, and at the fringes of reason, a new pattern emerged. All slates, when placed side by side, revealed something terrifying. Their margins aligned, symbols, curves, doodles, minor inconsistencies. Together, they formed a map, not of ID ran-VII, not of the system, of a shape and anatomy, perhaps, or a language, or a face. No one could agree, but the slates wanted placement. One adept went mad, trying to rearrange them to their correct order. He succeeded, for a moment. Then the slates changed. The map revised itself, added more, required more, and somewhere, at the edge of the command deck, another slate appeared. On it, a name. Your name, with a signature you don't remember ever using, and the order. Execute authority fragment 0. Nullify sequence. Let the voice continue. And at the bottom, it was always you. You just hadn't said yes yet. Command collapsed, but execution continued, because obedience was no longer a matter of hierarchy. It was invitation, and someone had accepted. The command was simple: Eastern Sweep, Rickon-only standard pattern, 17 skittery, all ranked within the 17th exploratory cohort of Red Mechanis Protocol, designated for terrain logging and anomaly confirmation. No combat expected, no hostiles recorded, just movement, just data. They began at 0600 local hive time. Their boots hit the stone with the sound of ritual uniform, absolute. Each step was tracked via internal cogitator, new spheric uplink confirmed. They moved like they always had, as machines, as scripture with limbs, red robes swaying, transonic antennas humming with purity. Electro-priests chanted a blessing behind them as they passed the perimeter of the Martian sub-fortress. The east lay before them, barren highlands, shallow fissures, dried lake beds. Empty they marched. Hour 1, all systems green, logs populated. Terrain was as expected. Hour 2, the skittery deviated slightly east-southeast to avoid a minor geological sink. Protocol dictated such adaptation. No report necessary. Hour 4, the cohort crossed into zone 12 row. OSPEC's readings began returning, mirrored data distance and altitude accurate, but reversed in visual orientation. A known glitch. Logged. Dismissed. Hour 6. They passed the ridge marking the halfway point of the sweep. They did not stop. No halt was given. No rest required. They continued. Hour 8. Command attempted recall. Voxlink confirmed receipt of message. Confirmation ping returned. But the cohort did not turn. They acknowledged but obeyed a different directive, one no one had issued. The next day, satellite scans picked up the entire cohort still moving east. Identical formation, identical spacing, no reduction in pace, no variation in step pattern. They had marched 87 kilometers, without pause, without deviation, a straight line. But that wasn't what disturbed the Magi. It was the terrain. The maps confirmed they should have reached the outer cliff shelf known as Dropscar Ridge, an impassable ravine, but the skittery had crossed it, without climbing, without flight. Footage showed the ravine was no longer there. It had never been. The land beneath the skittery had changed to accommodate their path. Or perhaps it had always known they would walk it. From that point on, their presence warped the data around them. Each hour they marched, another map segment became inaccurate, not just locally, globally. Entire regions shifted orientation, as if pulled by the echo of their movement. Geosynchronous satellites lost calibration, tracking their trajectory not because of skittery interference, but because direction itself had grown ambiguous. They were still heading east, but east no longer meant what it once had. The sun remained fixed above them, despite their velocity. Compass coils reversed polarity in their wake. One orbiting surveyor caught a thermal trail unlike any ever seen, a scar across the earth, not burned, but emptied. Soil particles rearranged behind the march. Dust refused to settle. Rocks aligned themselves parallel to the passing line, as if bowing. The skittery did not speak. Their Vox units went quiet within the second day. No interference, just silence. Attempted override commands were transmitted via sealed code. Each one bounced back, unopened, not rejected, not corrupted, just not applicable. On day 3, a curious anomaly appeared. Each Scutarius began bleeding from their right boot. Identical seepage, organic, not from injury. The fluid was thick, almost tar-like, with trace elements consistent with Martian soil but not Edranian composition. One tech adept suggested it was memory oil, used in ancient rites of Red Forge pilgrimage. No explanation was offered for why it was bleeding out of them. They continued by day 5. Their visual recordings ceased displaying terrain altogether. Footage showed only a white, filled-in, broken, textureless. Yet satellite imagery showed them moving through cracked desert. Ground teams sent to intersect their path arrived at the projected location and found nothing but an unbroken stretch of glass, fused into a perfect mirror. Their own reflections lagged by several seconds. They did not linger. The skittery cohort still walked. On day 7, they passed beneath a broken arch hempily wide, impossibly high. It hadn't existed before, not on any map, not in any survey. The structure bore no glyphs, no construction seams, no material analysis succeeded. It simply was a gateway for something that didn't believe in doors. They did not react. They did not look up. Their march did not change. They walked as if they had always been, walking somewhere around day 9. All tracking systems failed, not from jamming, not from malfunction, from inconsistency. The cohort could no longer be placed. Every coordinate contradicted itself. Attempts to triangulate their path produced answers in negative numbers, imaginary measurements, coalescing finally in a single reply from an AI cogitator that printed only one phrase: "They have entered east." No elaboration, no retrieval was attempted. Weeks passed, then months, and then something impossible. A second cohort appeared, marching east, the same pattern, same number, same spacing, same red robes. When intercepted by a scout team, they found the skittery unresponsive, but intact. Helm seals unbroken, Las carbines holstered, marching as if uninterrupted. But there was no record of launch, no orders issued, no units missing, yet their serials matched those lost to the original march. When the bodies were examined in secret, they found something worse. Every unit's memory node was fused, not corrupted, not burned, fused, as if something inside had grown too hot for containment, then solidified. One node, when carved open with a diamond-toothed, contained a single line of etched metal. Beneath the logic core, a prayer, not to the OMNISSIAH. Not in binary, in High Gothic, crudely carved. We do not return. East is forward. East is within. The cohort was sealed in a vault beneath the Martian shrine. No rites, no words. They still march in the dark, not because they disobeyed, but because they completed something no one understood had begun. East remains uncharted, because east is no longer directioned. It is a command, and someone answered it. Happened at 2:03 high. Across Idrin 7's entire hemisphere, the Vox network shattered. Not failed, shattered. Operators screamed, tore off their headsets, staggered backwards from their command thrones as if struck. Not from volume. The levels were low, subaudible in some cases, but every frequency, every bandwidth, every channel across civilian, military, and Mechanicus lines was seized for precisely 11 seconds. The waveform appeared like a sudden cliff on every Uzbek's. No buildup, no modulation, just a vertical, absolute spike. One long sound, sustained, uninterrupted. A scream, but not of terror, not alarm, something deeper, more ancient. Some said it sounded like mourning. Others said it wasn't a sound at all, but a feeling broadcast as wave. In Hive Orenthal, the voxelos bled coolant, not leaked. Bled. The viscous fluid steamed against sacred steel, sizzling in the shape of cursive glyphs no adept recognized. Yet no one could forget once seen. The scream left no crater, no fire, no proof of presence, only its imprint, and the silence that followed. Techodept Brel was the first to try analyzing the waveform. She worked beneath the East Voxspire, a half-submerged data sanctum layered with copper-ringed amplification coils designed for long-range listening. Her logs show the moment it hit. Her monitors turned black, not off, but impossibly lightless, as if even photon residue had been drawn out. Then the scream passed. Then the coils began to vibrate. Not in response, in harmony. The scream hadn't struck the Vox. It had joined it. It left residue. Data echoes so thick they layered across one another like oil on water. Brel extracted the spectrogram. The waveform was not irregular. It was intentional. 11 seconds, 11 identical pulses, each exactly 1.001 seconds apart. 1 pulse per second. +1. The final tone distorted, widened, bleeding into all surrounding bandwidths. It didn't decay. It dissolved, like a thought that refused to leave. Every transmission attempted afterward was altered. Words arrived before they were sent. Some came twice. Other phrases returned in reverse. One high-ranking Vox Lexiarch's emergency prayer for assistance was returned to her in her own voice, 4 seconds before she spoke it, and ended with a word she'd never used. Home. She no longer speaks. In a manufactorum, outside Hive Klivos. Servitors that had never been installed with vocal modules began to hum. The sound was not melodic. It was not structured, but it matched the exact resonance of the scream. One servitor combusted. Its internal black box was recovered. It contained a forward message, scrawled in oil, across a fractured cogitator screen. It missed you back. No origin. No author. In the astropathic sanctum. The reaction was more severe. Every psyker stationed within a 1,000-kilometer radius collapsed. Not one died. Not one bled. But all of them fell into silence. Not sleep. Not coma. Silence? No mental activity. No warp signature. Only stillness. Their pulse remained. Their lungs worked. But their eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking. Tears streaming endlessly. When one was lifted from his throne to be examined, the robes beneath him bore no wetness. The tears had not fallen. They had vanished. The high astropath, a blind woman known only as Vale, woke 6 hours later. Her first words, "I heard my daughter." She had never borne children. Forensics teams dissected the waveform. They extracted harmonics, layered echoes, residual subphonics. The scream was not flat. It was a voice, not human, but close. Close enough to grieve for. One trace layer contained a childlike tone, high-pitched, wavering, as if weeping through a storm. Another resembled deep chord resonance, similar to whale song recorded in Terran, oceans lost during the old night. But the most disturbing element came when they slowed the final segment. The long tone, the dissolving one, when stretched across 100-fold, it revealed modulation, not random, phonemic, a structure of syllables. 12. incoherent at first, but when parsed phonetically and cross-referenced against ancient Proto-Gothic, it formed a phrase, "Are we not still yours?" No official acknowledgement was made. The ecclesiarchy declared the Vox rupture an act of xeno-interference. The Adeptus Mechanicus issued a global reset of communicative frequencies. The Imperial Guard rotated encryption keys and restricted all non-essential transmission. None of it worked. The scream still haunted the lines, not active, not audible, but waiting. Each time a transmission reached beyond Idrin 7's stratosphere, it returned slower, heavier, like wading through oil. Words warped subtly, names rearranged. Orders arrived with extra line breaks, words stuttering themselves across the screen, and sometimes rarely a single extra message would appear, always the same, never addressed, never repeated, just once, a single line, "I remember you." The scream had not broken the Vox, it had entered it, claimed it, a scream not of agony, not of war, not of despair, but of longing, a call made by something that remembered. Connection not to invade, not to conquer, but to reach, and in that cry drawn from beyond structure, beyond machine, beyond prayers, something was heard that no Imperial record had the courage to log. Recognition, not of language, but of us, and somewhere, in the deep underhive, where Vox units no longer function, but still glow faintly in the dark, a child scribbled on the wall in ash and grease, humming a tune she never learned. She writes in perfect script. It knows how we sound when we hurt. They were housed in Orphan Cell 16, deep in the subspires of Hive Orenthal, far from the shrines and buried beneath pipes that leaked rust instead of water. The children were not exceptional. Most were offspring of administratum workers lost to factory collapse, others born of conscripts who never returned from distant wars. There were 43 of them at first. They were supervised by a pair of quiet sisters from the Order Pronatus, stationed to administer care and inculcate Imperial creed. Their Vox prayers were played nightly on loop, gentle voices repeating the small liturgies of obedience. Discipline was casual, lessons structured but soft. The children were mostly left to draw, and it began with the drawings. It wasn't noticed at first. Children drew what they always did: saints, lasguns, the emperor crowned in solar flame. But then one sketched a building no one recognized, angular, spiraling upward, windows facing inward. She called it the place we eat tomorrow. The next day, that building appeared, not fully, not immediately, but scaffolding went up near the precinct walls, where no construction had been scheduled. And a day after that, the scaffolding took the shape the child had drawn, same curve, same inward windows. It was dismissed as coincidence, until the others began to draw. A boy named Rennick, mute since birth, scratched a pattern into the walls with his fingernails. A spiral, a moving spiral, whose lines never touched but never ended. The next day, the hive's lumen globes flickered in his pattern. All of them, citywide, each bulb dimmed in sequence, forming the spiral across an entire district. Another child, Emile, began to speak in detail of a fire that hadn't happened. She described it with calm clarity, the smoke curling into a shape like a bent crown, the smell of melted glass, the sound of weeping through a 2 days later, a sublevel coolant failure caused a thermal overload in Hab Zeta 44. Fire, smoke, bent steel, melted glass. And the Vox in the chapel broadcast, weeping for 37 seconds before going silent. The sisters began collecting the drawings, not to archive them, to warn others. One child predicted the breaking of the Vox. He drew it as a mouth that opened to wide. Another etched a city that folded into itself. 3 drew a starless sky, but it wasn't just prediction. The children stopped referencing the present. When asked what day it was, they replied with numbers too large to record. When told to recite prayers, they murmured lines the ecclesiarchy had never sanctioned. One girl drew the emperor, but not as anyone had ever drawn him. No armor, no throne, no light. Just a tall man of bone and breath, standing behind her shadow. When asked what he was doing, she replied, listening to the one that comes next. The order summoned a confessor. He lasted one night. In the morning, he had removed his eyes. They were still wet, cradled in his palms, and on his lips he repeated, over and over, "They are remembering forward. They are remembering forward." One child, Vel, began to wake up weeping, not in fear, in grief. She could not explain why. She kept a small stack of picked paper beside her cot and would draw each morning before speaking. Her images grew simpler: a crack in the sky, a hand reaching down but not touching, a shadow inside a book. Her final drawing was a blank page, signed on the back, "We are done." She didn't speak again. She didn't die. She just stopped being noticed. No one remembered feeding her. Her name disappeared from the roll call. Her bunk remained made, always, perfectly smooth. Her drawing pile was still there, but the pages were blank, not erased, just waiting. Children who once sang now sat in silence. One of them began scratching messages into the floor, with a nail pried from his own bunk. "Tomorrow is cold. They'll call us past. Memory isn't backwards anymore." Then, the dream started to spread. The sisters dreamed of names they'd never known, of sunrises from beneath the ground, of prayers written backwards on their own skin. One woke screaming, her mouth filled with salt. The other was found curled beneath the archive table, humming a lullaby not yet written, and clutching a child's tooth in her fist. Acolytes from the Ordo Hereticus were summoned. They took samples. They confiscated every drawing, scanned every mark, purified the walls with holy promethium, but the children remained silent. They were not possessed, not demonic, not mutated. They were simply ahead. One interrogator placed a picture recorder in the center of the dormitory. It captured only 13 frames before glitching. In the final frame, the children were all looking at the camera, all of them, at once, smiling when the footage was recovered. Every face in the frame matched archived images of the same children taken 20 years later. Scars, age lines, growth patterns, precisely correct. But those futures hadn't happened, couldn't have happened. Yet there they were. A week passed, then the drawings stopped. No one ordered it. No one forbade them. The children simply stopped lifting pencils, crayons, pieces of lead. They sat, stared, waited, there. Hands still twitched, as if remembering the motion. Their eyes still flicked toward the wall, expecting something, but nothing came. Only one mark appeared. Afterward, carved into the edge of a bunk by a finger worn to blood. 6 words: "We are what remembers the end." And beneath it, a symbol, a spiral, not moving, not now, but waiting to turn again. The Auspex logs from Astmistra, Salinas 3 were clear. A new body had entered Edron 7's orbital pattern. Declination locked. Velocity stable. Spherical rotation at near synchronous rate. A second moon undetected prior, unmapped, unnamed. It arrived without incident. No warp flash. No meteor trail. No echo in the noosphere. It was simply there, hanging in the upper void. Perfectly still to the naked eye, yet moving with the planet as if it had always belonged at first. The cult Mechanicus dismissed it as an Auspex mirage, void dust forming a coherent lens effect. Satellite interference, a sensor ghost mimicking mass. They recalibrated their data spirals, realigned observatory spires, and invoked corrective binaric chants. The readings did not change. The body remained, not a glitch, not a drift, an object, a new moon, only it wasn't. It had no name in the archival vaults, no signature on ancient orbital schemata, Idrin 7's planetary field had supported only one moon since its system designation during the Great Crusade. That moon, Hecker Primstill, orbited in full visual and gravitational compliance. This new object moved like a moon, looked like a moon, shadowed like a moon, but it cast no pull, no tidal effect, no mass dot. Its presence was entirely visual. No ships drifting near it altered course. No orbital debris curved in its direction. It left no interference on Vox transmissions, no distortion on solar reflection. Even the light it reflected appeared subtle, not diminished, not absent, just wrong in angle, an illumination that obeyed optics but disobeyed logic. They named it, provisionally, Object IX, but no one used that name among the lower adepts. It became the Eye. Others whispered the second. One simply called it the Listener. Within the orbital sanctum of Observatoria, Makudendrite Kappa, a debate began. The Magi convened. Hololith projections rendered the object in exquisite detail, craterless, smooth, marbled with ridges resembling scar tissue. It rotated, but not fully. One hemisphere remained unseen, despite multiple satellite attempts. Auspec's pulses sent to its far side returned, ... static. Not rejection, not interference. Static, and beneath the static, one report noted a subharmonic THRUM ... when amplified. The sound resembled a breath held too long. Magos Rend examined the object through direct vision Auspec's lensing. Haraja's sacred replacement, polished chrome with 16 layers of filter logic ceased when she focused on the terminator line of the moon. Not mechanical failure, not system burnout. It locked. She stared for 11 minutes, unmoving, until a junior adept severed her visual relay. When she spoke again, her voice was wrong. Not pitch, not tone. Cadence. She spoke in 10-beat phrases, symmetrical in syllable count. I see no light behind it. It faces what it already knows. No path curves toward its hunger. When her logic stacks were dissected, a phrase had been carved electronically into her thought chain regulator. This was promised. There had been no access, no tampering. The hardware had never been removed from her skull. Within days, the planetary populace began to notice. It wasn't seen from every location. That was part of the unease. The moon appeared only from certain angles, not just obscured by horizon or structure absent from the sky itself. From Hive Clivos, it was visible only at dusk, flickering into view just as the sun dipped below the smog line. From Hive Orenthal, it hovered perpetually in the northeastern quadrant, regardless of planetary rotation. From the deserts of the outer girdle, it never rose. People began to record it. No image ever matched another. Each picked capture showed the same shape but altered texture. A line here, a blemish there, a shadow in the curvature that suggested a hollow. Some began to speculate. Perhaps it was not a single object, but many, rotating through the same orbital path, phasing one behind the next in slow succession. One tech priest argued they were all the same moon, each rendered differently by observation, as if being watched altered its appearance. Others dismissed it entirely until the dreams began. Reports trickled in from across the continent, dreams of a vast sphere hanging low in the sky, but closer than it should be, not floating, hovering. A proximity felt not in the eye, but in the sternum, pressing, watching. In these dreams, the moon opened, not physically, not like a mouth or a gate, but inward, like a thought turning its gaze back onto itself. Adept Progus recorded his dream. He described it as a memory I had never made, watching me from the outside, wearing the shape of the sky. 3 days later, he gouged out his ears, not to escape sound, but because he could hear the surface, thinking. Another development followed. The moon began to reflect things that were not there. Observatory? Scans revealed surface contours that resembled Hive Orenthal, older, warped, twisted. windows missing, streets rearranged, as if the moon reflected a version of the city from another line of causality. One scan displayed an entire manufactorum spire that had not yet been built, complete with insignia of an imperial house that did not yet rule. They tried to prove illusion. They failed. The reflections grew more accurate, then more personal. One adept saw his own childhood home on the surface. A barrack sergeant claimed to see the crater from his brother's execution site. A child pointed at the sky and whispered, "That's where I'll die." When asked how he knew, he said, "Because it already saw me." Panic did not spread. Worse, acceptance did. People began to include the moon in prayers, in oaths. One street preacher began every sermon with, "Under the second witness, we are known." Soldiers painted its outline on the inside of their armor. The mechanicus tried to scan deeper, to pierce the surface with gravwave arrays and focused auspex bursts. Every signal vanished, not blocked, not reflected, absorbed, like breath drawn inward by lungs too massive to fathom. Then a final test was, a TTEMPTEDA drone was launched. It reached the moon in 3 hours. It entered its shadow, then it vanished. Its final transmission displayed a single image, not of the moon, of ID RAN-VII. The planet, as seen from above, alone no sun. No stars, just a single planet, spinning in darkness, watched by nothing except the viewer. And in the final frame, just before the feed cut, 4 words pulsed in the corner of the screen. It has always been. The cult mechanicus no longer debates what it is, only what it's waiting for. It began without sound, not silent saps, a hollowing of the air, the pressure just before a held breath, stretching across the planet like a prelude to speech. The rift had hovered above Idran 7 for weeks now, growing neither wider nor closer, just more present. A fixed wound in the sky that made people avert their eyes without understanding why. But on that day, something changed. The rift contracted, not visibly, not to the eye, but the world felt it. Somewhere deep in the foundations of Hive, Orenthal, the pressure valves of a water filtration unit imploded, not from overuse, but from lack of content. The pipes hadn't emptied. They had ceased containing. Engineers opened the feed lines to find them pristine, untouched, and utterly unused, as if the water had never been rooted there to begin with. Records of their flow, printed and filed, still existed: diagrams, inked notes, maintenance schedules, but the water had never come. Near the polar settlements, entire fields of solar panels vanished, not collapsed, not shattered, simply not present. The ground beneath them showed no disturbance, no anchor bolts, no shadow. The snow was smooth and undisturbed. Drone footage from the day before showed rows of clean, glinting cells. The next recording showed blank tundra. The logs remained. Serial numbers, energy readings, discharge data, but the panels no longer did. It did not strike like lightning. It did not burn. The warp did not attack. It breathed everywhere. Something small went missing. A boot, a name, the color of a friend's voice. People stumbled mid-step, forgetting where they were going, not due to distraction, but because the destination had been removed. Some found their homes, but not the hallways that led to them. One man opened his chest locker to find all of his clothing still there, but none of it recognized. Each item bore his name. Each fit him, but they were not his. And then came the first town, Luthenthera, a weather survey outpost on the planet's windward coast, vanished in the space of a breath. Not collapsed, not bombarded, no crater, no scorch. The Auspex logs recorded wind speed, barometric fluctuation, and local atmospheric density for the hours leading up to the event. Then one entry, blank. Then a pulse, soft, wide, not seismic, but gravitational, in emotional register. Something had pulled, and when satellites searched again, the land was there. But Luthen Theta was not, nor the road that led to it, nor the power lines that once fed it, nor the families who worked its towers, just a flat plain, snowless, despite the surrounding region, stretching out in featureless invitation. A woman 30 kilometers away wept suddenly during breakfast. When asked why, she said, "I don't know what I forgot, but it loved me." 2 hours later, a scribe in the Hive archives opened a drawer to retrieve census records from Luthin-Theta. The drawer was there, the label was there, but inside, blank vellum, stack after stack of parchment without mark, without age, without weight. The drawer, weighed separately, came back lighter than empty. The warp did not rage, it considered. On the following day, in the administrative chamber of Hive, Clivos, the walls began to exhale. Paint flaked backward. Names lifted from plaques. One by one, the titles of every officer vanished, not in fire or decay, but disinterest. The metal bore no scars. The plastiles showed no abrasion. It was simply never engraved, and those who saw the plates struggled to recall who had once been honored. Commander Thalanley, recently praised for containing the unrest in the manufactorum levels, was asked to sign a requisition form. He stared at the paper for several minutes, then asked what Thale meant. They showed him his badge, his uniform, his face in the mirror. He did not panic. He simply said, "I don't think I'm the person who belongs in this skin." He left the room. No one stopped him. 2 hours later, his quarters had restructured. The floor plan did not match any internal layout. His possessions were gone. The walls bore no signs of ever having been his. One pic, archived by accident during routine surveillance, showed the door sealing itself behind him. Not slamming, sealing, as if exhaling him. The rift contracted further. The sky above the southern divide narrowed visibly, its constellations folding in on themselves, stars winking out one by one. But telescopic readings confirmed they still existed. They had not dimmed, they had retreated. Observers reported that the depth of the sky had changed, that space itself now seemed closer, more immediate, not above them, but around. And then, Idrin VII's oldest library, a pre-imperial structure, converted into a schola progenium centuries ago, was found to contain nothing. Not empty shelves, no shelves at all. The rooms were there, intact, preserved. The scent of paper and dust still clung to the air, but every book, every scroll, every slate, gone. No inventory, no memory, no title recalled, and no one could agree on what had ever been written there. A senior archivist was found in the corner of the West Wing, cradling a single blank tome, whispering, "I used to be made of this." More things disappeared. Not places, not people, not yet structures of sense. A soldier described the smell of his childhood home, only to forget the name of the city he was born in. A preacher delivered a homily using a language no one recognized, not even him. One child attempted to draw a map of her neighborhood. She included a hill, a tower, a bridge. When shown satellite imagery, none of those features had ever existed. She pointed at the rift. That's where they went when they were done. Not stolen, not broken. Just taken in. In Hive Orenthal skyport, a shuttle lifted off, transmitting the usual clearance code. Midway through ascent, it blinked out of existence. No explosion, no trajectory. The radar blip didn't, vanished, stretched, as if the shuttle had become part of a different logic. A paragraph removed from its page, inhaled by something that didn't hate, only hungered. The warp did not scream, it breathed, and the planet breathed with it. One long, slow inhalation, a drawing in. Not of flesh, of meaning in something, somewhere within that breath. Was curious, not cruel, not loving, just curious, as if learning what we were. By removing the scaffolding of our memory and watching what remained, as if asking, "If I took everything, would you still know who you were?" And Idrin V began to forget, not in grief, but in surrender. It was not the first time Canon Prelate Alvaron had seen heresy. He had served across 3 systems, through war zones and schisms, through purges and compliance rites. He had personally overseen the burning of apocryphal gospels etched into interrogated void monks who claimed the emperor walked backwards through time, even survived the pulpit massacre on Garas 12, when a congregation dissolved into tongues and laughter. But nothing, not madness, not witchcraft, not warp-touched blasphemy prepared him for the moment the Book of Burning Light began to change. It was morning, or what passed for it, under the ash-choked dome of Hive Ornth. The chapel was dim, candles burning low, their wax pooled into shapes that made the junior clergy uneasy. Alvaron was alone. The hymn vox had failed during the night. No voices carried, no bells tolled. The air felt ... stale. Not dead, just uninvited. He opened the book with reverent fingers, just as he had every day for 4 decades. The binding crackled. The pages fluttered. Chapter 3, verse 12. The Emperor is the flame in the darkness, and we are the wick. He knew it by heart, but the verse had changed. It read, "The flame was never lit, only remembered." He stared, closed the book, rubbed his eyes, reopened it. Verse 13 was worse. He waits because you need him to. Not blasphemy, not outright denial, something gentler, worse, permission. He tore the page out with shaking hands, laid it flat on the pulpit. The ink shimmered, rearranged, rewrote. Faith is only memory practiced aloud. His breath caught. The parchment warmed. Not fire, not fever, recognition, as if the page knew he'd read it, as if that had always been the goal. He closed the book again, locked it in the reliquary, ordered the chapel, sealed no. One was to touch the text, but it did not stop. Every copy of the Book of Burning Light in the shrine began to change. Slowly at first, the covers gold, dulled. The pages thickened. Letters bloomed into new phrases, like rot growing in time-lapse. Entire chapters shifted tense. The parables restructured themselves into questions. One page bore only the phrase, "Are you still reading?" And beneath it, "Then you already know." Word spread. The younger clergy panicked. One burned his copy. Another attempted to transcribe it manually, to reset the logic. But the transcription changed mid-sentence. The ink slithered, reshaping itself into glyphs no one recognized, yet all of them understood. Alvaron attempted a sermon that day. He stepped to the pulpit, opened his mouth, and forgot the emperor's name. Not the title, not the image, but the name, the syllables that underpinned every sacred address. It fell from his tongue like dust. He coughed and said nothing. No, one blamed him, because they no longer remembered the right questions. He began fasting, isolating himself, praying not in recitation, but desperation. He begged the golden throne for clarity, for correction. He kissed the Aquila until it bled his lips dry. The next morning, his mirror showed no reflection, not absence, just ... refusal. The mirror had become a blank window, a surface that said, "You know what you look like. Why are you asking?" He began writing down the old prayers by hand, pouring ink over parchment, scratching each line from memory. But every time he reached the word hope, his hand stopped. Not from fatigue, not from doubt, from interference. His fingers would hover, twitch, then choose another word. Once, hunger. Once, horizon. And once, his absence. He collapsed, weeping, not because he didn't believe, but because he still did. And belief was no longer protected. It was interactive. On the 21st day, he unsealed the reliquary, took the book, carried it to the grand brazier, at the center of the chapel, lit. The sacred oil, and fed it to the fire. The flame did not consume it. The book opened, pages fluttered, as if in wind. Flames coiled around them, not devouring, but reading. The text pulsed. Ink boiled. Sentences unraveled and reformed mid-air. One page floated free, hovered above the fire, and turned slowly to face Alvaron. He saw no words, only a reflection of himself, not literal, not a mirror, a truth, himself, without faith. And it still looked back, still waited, still asked, "Now that nothing is promised, will you love him anyway?" He screamed, grabbed the book, forced it into the flame. Held it there with both hands, his skin cracked, burned, peeled, but the book did not blacken. It wept. Ash fell in. Patterns, circles, spirals. A sentence formed in cinder across the floor. The page does not fail the reader fails to end the page. When it was over, the book was gone, so was the fire, and so was Alvaron's voice. He never spoke again. He did not need to. He began to write not prayers, not sermons, but translations. Pages upon pages of half-legible script. Not heresy, not prophecy. A new liturgy, not structured, not sanctioned, but personal. He called it the book that watches. Back. The clergy refused to read it, but none stopped him, because the sacred texts had already rewritten themselves, not into lies, into questions. On the 33rd day, a child entered the chapel, picked up one of Alvaron's pages, read it aloud. It said, "You are the answer." He smiled, left. The page on the altar. No one remembered his name. No one remembered who had lit the last candle. No one remembered when the fire had been real, only that it had once warmed them. And somewhere, in the ash pile where the brazier once stood, a new book began to form. Blank, open, waiting. No alarm sounded. No klaxon shrieked. No vox broadcast screamed its warning. There was no tremor beneath the feet, no flash in the sky, no scent of ozone or promethium to herald its coming. But at 17 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds, Hydran exhaled and nothing moved. Every timepiece across the planet, civilian Militarum field watches, Mechanicus, data, ecclesiarchal sundials, even calibrated for orbital drift, all stopped for 1 second, not staggered, not regionally, simultaneously, and then resumed. No loss of time. The recorded moment remained fixed in every cogitator, every loop timer, every mechanical and digital tick counter, a blank second. 17 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds, .000 was counted, and then again. 17 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, and 0 milliseconds, as if the planet held its breath, or had 2 heartbeats placed where one belonged. No one noticed at first, because for the living nothing had happened. No shift, no pain, no pause in breath, or blink or thought. Only later, when logs were compared and timestamps collided, did they realize what had occurred. Only the dead had felt it. The Medicae staff at Ornathal's High Spire mortuary first reported the anomaly. 4 bodies already cold, all secured 2 preservation slabs, began bleeding. Small rivulets, arteries sealed for days, wept again. Autopsy incisions gaped. Not violently, just slightly, like old wounds sighing open. Sensors recorded no surge. Cooling systems had not failed. No warp contamination. No psychic interference. But the dead for a moment resumed warmth. One body, declared deceased 42 hours earlier, took a single breath. Just one. No pulse. No brainwave. A reflexive expansion of the lungs. The sound of fabric shifting. Skin stretching. Then silence. Then nothing. Then stillness again. At first, it was dismissed as contamination. Mishandled procedure. Until the reports multiplied. across Idrin 7's surface, from every region. In every hab and hive and field post, a pattern emerged. Machines monitoring life signs registered microspikes in the dead. Voxcasters caught bursts of static containing pulses that, when plotted, formed a waveform shaped like an inverted heartbeat. 3 pulses, a pause, then one larger dot. The cadence matched the rhythm of standard human systolic function, but reversed. Every chapel's prayer cycle missed a beat. Choirs reported a moment of dissonance, voices slipping one breath ahead, one breath behind, then unifying again as if nothing had happened. Confessors claimed they felt a sudden warmth pass through the air, like breath against the ear. One wept mid-sermon, unable to explain why, whispering, "I was forgiven for something I haven't done yet." In the underhives, a feral child awoke screaming. She repeated the same sentence until sedated. "My mother came back, then left again." Her mother had been dead 5 years. Hospitals recorded flatlines that curved upward for less than a second, just enough to register, not enough to revive. Cogitators stuttered. The scream from Chapter 10, thought long gone, reappeared in the audio substrates, not played, not heard, but etched into the void between waveforms, silent, present, like a voice, too close to register as separate. But the dead were not the only ones. Touched, the unborn moved, across multiple Medicaid centers. Fetal scans recorded synchronous spasms at precisely 17 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. Mothers felt no pain, no contraction, just a presence, as if their bodies remembered someone standing nearby. One woman described it as a ghost midwife, another as being prayed for by someone who had never been born. The tech priests of Cogwell's Spire observed their cogitator cores fluctuate, then stabilize. All central processes paused exactly 1 second. Not failure, not disruption, consideration. One adept claimed that every logic engine had, in that second, entered a state of doubt. When asked what that meant, she replied, they were waiting to see if time would continue. The Mechanicus did not pursue the thought, but something else did. In the deep vaults of the Pale Archivia forgotten, Administratum storehouse, beneath a dead man district, dust disturbed itself. The air shifted. Stacked record scrolls changed position. The order of entries in several ancient census codices rearranged. No added names, no deletions, just ... reordering ... as if memory itself had realigned. The called it a temporal hinge, a moment where cause and effect flexed, where consequence asked whether it was still necessary. They had no theories, only diagrams. Spirals with broken spokes, maps with no legend. One simply whispered, that was not a second, that was a decision. The dead did not rise, the past did not alter, but something had been consulted, and in that moment, reality waited for permission. A data slate recovered from a derelict Vox station bore a line of unsourced script. No input recorded. No hand touched it. It read, "There is a difference between stillness and attention." And in the days following, those who meditated, those who dreamed, those who wandered between thought and sleep reported the same sensation, being watched, not from outside but from behind, not hostile, not divine, but curious, as if something had leaned close, not to strike, not to touch, but to listen, to hear the space between breaths, to mark the rhythm of a species that didn't know it could be paused. The moment passed, the world continued. No buildings fell, no fires burned, no demons screamed from the sky. But a question now lingered, up space in the heart's rhythm, a hesitation in every thought, a second that should not have been, and across Idrin V, on every wall where breath once fogged, one new phrase began to appear, etched in condensation, marked in soot, carved into frost. The dead remembered us, and something else did too. It began with quiet, not stillness, not peace, quiet, a kind that arrived not from absence, but refusal, as if sound itself recoiled, ashamed of its own presence. Hive Orenthal, once a great engine of labor and prayer, found its endless rhythms slowing not in machinery, but in breath. Doors still opened, lights still flickered, systems still cycled, but no noise followed. Footsteps passed across Ferrocrete without echo. Wind moved across hive stacks without whistle. Laughter, when forced, collapsed into the throat like a sin half-spoken. And then, the crying began. Not from people. Not at first. The shrine of St. Carith was the first to notice. Its reliquary glistened not with holy oil, but with moisture. Thin streams gathered at the base of the saint's statue, winding down the stone cheek, pooling at the feet. The source was not atmospheric, no leak, no condensation, just tears, trailing down carved marble eyes that had never wept. They gathered in small basins below the plinth, still and glassy. A novice wiped them away. They returned, twice as much. He tried again, and again, the next morning. The statue cracked, a single fracture down the middle of its face. A weeping wound, open and precise. In the central Hab district's walls, dampened, not leaks, seepage. Paint blistered, not from heat, but from beneath pushed outward by droplets that appeared where no source could be found. Floors slicked with condensation that rose from dry stone. People walked without speaking, not because they feared, because their voices felt uninvited. The air did not permit interruption. In one Vox recording chamber, a scribe attempted to relay daily. Broadcast prayers. His mouth opened, his lungs exhaled, but no sound emerged. His vocal cords functioned. The mic worked. The room's ambient sensors recorded movement, but every second of footage was mute. His lips moved, his tears fell. That the feed recorded in perfect clarity. Tears everywhere. Animals wept without provocation. Nesting scoverots, blind and feral, released high-pitched wails before curling into silent stillness. Servo skulls machines without emotion, or flesh-dripped hydraulic fluid from islands that had not been activated. One flung itself against a stained glass window, not in malfunction, in grief. The final image it captured before shattering. The rift, looming in the sky, no closer than before, but somehow present, not as mass, not as light. As morning. The warp had not entered with fire. It had not boiled the seas, or split the heavens. It had become sorry. The atmosphere itself began to bend, not visibly, but the light changed. Sunlight reached the ground, still filtered through the smog. Except now it refracted off moisture that did not exist. Rainbows appeared in the dust, soft and hanging, unmoving. Light dimmed at noon, not from cloud or shadow, but from regret. Shadows curled toward their owners. Not longer closer. A wall, etched with the names of the honored dead, began to shimmer. Letters bled down the stone, unwriting themselves one by one, not erased, withdrawn, as if the dead no longer wished to be seen, as if their memory ached beneath the weight of being remembered. An old woman in the underhive said her husband had whispered to her from the soil. He said he was sorry we stayed. She died hours later, not from trauma, from softness. Her organs simply ceased tension. She didn't collapse. She rested. Across Hive Orenthal, a low mist formed, not thick, not obscuring, just enough to coat the teeth, just enough to carry weight. It moved slowly, hugging the base of structures, wrapping pillars, pressing into doors without passing through. It carried no toxins, no heat. It was not alive, but it mourned. People described it as watching, not as an enemy, as an onlooker, too late to intervene. In the central square, a boy dropped a toy. It cracked. Instead of sparks or smoke, it hummed a lullaby. One the boy's mother claimed she sang to him when he was a baby. She had never recorded it. The toy had no audio function. One wall began to leak light, A seam cracked open in plasteel siding, and from within spilled something like illumination, but not bright. A dull, slow cascade of color, not constant, but grieving. Faint tones, shifting between hues that had no names. Witnesses swore they saw memory in those colors. One man screamed. One woman knelt and opened her arms, whispering, "You came back." The light touched no one. It simply passed through, softening, as if apologizing. The Mechanicus sealed themselves away. Emotion was not theirs to bear. They burned incense, whispered code, shut down their optics when the weeping began to reach them, but even the machines could not remain untouched. One cogitator stack refused activation until a tech adept spoke the name of his stillborn daughter aloud. Only then did it hum. Only then did the calculations begin. It left him shaking, because he had never told anyone that name. The ecclesiarchy wept openly, now not out of fear, but understanding. Their sermons could not reach the faithful. Their words fell flat. Their symbols wilted on banners that once stood straight. No heresy had been committed. No demon had walked. But something deeper had come, something that did not seek souls, but the spaces where souls had failed. The entire planet felt apology, and something else. A stillness that was not peace. A grief that was not reaction. A knowing dot, as if the warp had finally recognized what this place was. Not a bastion, not a target, but a wound dot. And in the final hours before collapse, the planet wept, the stone wept, the air wept, the light itself dimmed, not to vanish, but to mourn. One last record, found scrawled on the wall of a child's hab chamber, written in soft charcoal loops. It isn't angry, it's just sad we were ever alone. They called themselves the Veiled Eye, not a sanctioned sect, not even a tolerated schism. Just another fracture of faith in a hive already cracking at every seam. They wore no colors, raised no banners. Their doctrine existed only in fragments, chalk sigils under bridgeways, whispers traded in refectory shadows. A single phrase etched behind the tongue of a flayed arbitrator. It sees through endings. For years, they had been hunted, laughed at, forgotten. The Arbites catalogued them as a low-tier heretic splinter group, too fragmented to pose a serious threat, too poetic to merit extermination. Their only crime, officially, had been the hoarding of prescribed relics and the unauthorized modification of data slates with recursive glyph chants. That changed when one of their members leaped from a transit tram and shouted, "Before impact, the sky will fold before it burns." It was dismissed until the sky did. They were recorded in scraps, denied pulpits, refused access to the shrine vox, locked from all civic dataspheres. But they had built their own broadcast chamber beneath the decommissioned transport yard in Hive-Orinth. There, an unlicensed transmitter screamed into the void nightly, its reach blocked by standard frequencies. It signaled barely a cough in the spectrum. Now it rang clear. No vox, no suppression, just clarity. Pure and bone-chilling. The final transmission began, without fanfare, a single voice. A woman, maybe, though Layer does, if speaking through herself across time, she said, "We were wrong about what it would do, but not about why." She didn't name it. Didn't need to. All across Edron 7, those who had dismissed the Veiled Eye found themselves silent as the signs matched frame for frame their forbidden prophecies. Streets had indeed folded into themselves. Time had paused and pulled like lungs. The light had mourned, and now the last words of the cult echoed into open, uncontested silence. There is no salvation, only awareness, and awareness hurts. The Vox adepts who recovered the signal noted something strange. The signal carried no location tag, no signature, no origin. It wasn't being transmitted. It was already there. The cult had predicted this too, not in exactness, but in rhythm. Their chants, once derided for their nonsense phrasing and recursive structure, now resembled the patterns found in the skies, flickering intervals of black between lightning that no storm should have possessed. One acolyte of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica cross-referenced those chants against War President's activity. The waveform matched exactly the pulse recorded during the moment everything wept. How could they have known? The answer given by the Ministorum was heresy. The answer offered by the Inquisition was silence. But among the ruins of their last hidden chapel, buried beneath the rubble of a collapsed hab block, was a mural scorched into the ferrocrete wall. Not painted, not carved, scorched, as if memory itself had burned the image. Into place it showed ID ran-VII, but wrong, stretched, bent, cradled in a ring of impossible geometry, with symbols that bled into each other, depending on where one stood. The planet hovered like a droplet about to fall. Below it, a phrase. We welcomed it, not because we desired the end, but because it remembered us. No one knew who authored it. No one claimed responsibility. The last member of the cult known to the Arbites, a man named Tholavian, was found kneeling in the center of a graph platform, hands open, eyes burned out, not by flame but by sight. His chest bore a symbol cut with precise surgical care, the same spiral, the same glyph now etched into the warprift itself, seen by orbiting probes before they too vanished. His mouth had been sewn shut, not recently, years before, and yet, blood tests confirmed vocal strain in the hours before his death. He had spoken, he had screamed, but not in pain. The notes left behind in his cell, written in blood, but unnaturally symmetrical, concluded with one final line. We weren't mad. We were just early. The Ordo Hereticus sent a kill squad to sterilize all remaining cult sites. They found nothing. Rooms that had existed the day before were gone. Chambers, sealed in ferrocrete, were found filled with ash, but no bone. One data slate survived, broken. Its screen glitched with static, but only when viewed through unaided eyes. Mechanicus optics registered no activity, but organics saw something else. Faces, dozens, weeping, not pleading, not warning, witnessing those who stared too long, found their dreams folding, days running backward, water dripping upward, language bending into mathematical shapes they could not unsee. The final known words of the veiled I-cult were never spoken aloud. They were burned into the side of a magistratum transport vehicle, appearing overnight without scorch marks or damage, just presence. The phrase, short, indifferent, certain. There is no prophecy, only memory running late. And then, silence. No more broadcasts, no more sightings. Only matching events. One by one, it was not supposed to be possible. The warp does not answer in names. It swallows them, breaks them apart, forges their syllables into weapons or echoes or false saints. But the astropath designated Vel Heska believed otherwise. She believed it had a name, not an assigned one, not a designation from an orbital chart or an inquisitorial ledger. A true name. One that had not been given, but remembered deep within the rift's silence, waiting to be known again. Her body was found in the center of a null-warded chamber, surrounded by salt glyphs and dampened silver coils. Every psychic buffer had been activated, every countermeasure in place. Her handlers wore full null carapace and carried molecular disruption kills. She had prepared. She had readied herself. And still, it spoke back. The recording begins with calm, a level tone, her voice clipped but steady. Typical of sanctioned psychers with decades of formal training. I feel it watching, she says, but not outward. It watches inward, into me, into us, as if we are the anomaly, and it is the observer. The crew of adepts outside the chamber record no significant disturbance, a few flickers on the psi scale, nothing alarming. She continues, I will begin vocal alignment now. tracing the syllabic lattice through layered harmonic recall. She speaks 5 words. None match low Gothic, to seem to mimic high Gothic cadence, but end in back-formed glottal stops. Like language folding its own tongue, at the 6th word, the chamber dims. Not the light, the color of light. Saturation bleeds. Shadows detach from source. One adept begins vomiting, though exposed to no signal. A servitor begins reciting birth dates of unknown individuals. Another simply locks in place and utters. It remembers its own forgetting. Valheska smiles. It heard me. The rift is still orbiting at visual range, but Auspex fails to resolve it. Not obscured, ignored. All systems begin flagging its location as insufficient definition. One dataslate attempts to autocorrect the coordinates and instead draws a perfect circle, no labels. No lines, just blank. Curvature. She speaks again. This time it is not a word, it is an inhalation, but the audio feed registers it as presence. A second signature appears in the room, unmeasured, unfelt, except that it pulls at every sentence spoken after. Val's tone changes. This is not communion. This is ... inventory. It's checking us. Not like an enemy, like ... She stops. The word never arrives. Her handlers report a sudden shift in her physical bearing. She stands straighter. Eyes glow faintly, not with light, but with clarity. It doesn't want worship, she says. It wants ... double quotes. Another pause. I know its name. And then she says it. 12 syllables, none of which any transcription can accurately repeat. The waveform of the recording bends. Not clips, not breaks. Bends. Sound loops backward for 2 seconds. The walls contract by 1 millimeter and never return. And then her body begins to speak back. Not her mouth, her entire structure. Her skin vibrates. The musculature beneath twitches in cadence. Her bones click in sequence, and the recording, for the first time, captures the riff's voice. Not a reply, a recognition, not as answer, as mirror. A voice layered over her own, not louder, not deeper, just closer. It speaks 3 syllables, then stops. Every device in the chamber records the same anomaly. The word does not end. It never resolves into silence, it simply continues. The psyker begins to learn it, visually. ONTOLOGICALLY. Reports. Note that she becomes less certain. Observers cannot agree on her exact pose. Her height shifts per frame. Her pupils rotate inward, forming the symbol of the veiled eye cult without ever touching pen or paint. She whispers, once, not name, not language, self. And then the data ends, not corrupted, not cut, it just stops. Not a termination, a cessation of the recording's will to continue. The next recorded moment jumps ahead 8 minutes. She is gone, no trace, no heat signature, no vaporized flesh, no warp residue, just her shadow, still imprinted on the chamber wall, not burnt, not etched, cast, as if the light remembers what stood there in the aftermath. The Ordo Malleus deployed secondary psychers to examine the room. None survived longer than 30 seconds. Each one heard a fragment of their own name whispered back to them. Not the full name, just the part they had forgotten. One collapsed. One tore out their own tongue. One fell silent and began drawing spirals until his fingers bled. Valheska was never recorded again, but her voice appears in fragments across Vox signals throughout Edron V. Not coherent phrases, not warnings, just presence. Half a breath, the space before a name, and every time someone thinks they hear her, the exact same thing happens. A thought cuts itself. Short. Mid-word. Mid-thought. Mid-self. The first to notice were not scholars, not adepts or cogitator attached. It was the old woman who sold starch grain from her porch in Lower Orenthal. She forgot her son's name, not from age, not from grief, but mid-sentence, as she handed him his ration slip. He blinked, confused, then asked who she was. The conversation ended in silence, both staring at each other with recognition that lacked anchor. Not strangers, not family, just ... UNFASTENED. Elsewhere, across the collapsing hive, similar absences bloomed. Memories once permanent weddings, oaths, scars, first kills, baptisms beneath the aquila began to fray. Not erased, negotiated. One day the guardsman remembered 3 brothers. The next he was an only child. His transfer orders still bore the correct identifiers. But the face beside his bunk no longer matched the photo embedded in his ident tag. The name was right, but the essence of it, the feeling stitched between memory and self, had gone. Priests preached louder to drown out the uncertainty, but even liturgy stumbled. Words once wrote now rang hollow, hymns collapsing halfway through with tongues caught between syllables that felt wrong. The canticle of flame became the canticle of something else. Each recitation rewrote itself, subtly, like a corrupted prayer adapting mid-verse to a new audience. One site, hidden in the undervaults of Hive Severin, documented her own decay. Her logs remained the last entries etched in trembling script on the walls of her cell. I can remember the moment of my birth. I can remember the touch of the black ships. I can remember the first soul I brushed against in terror, and the first time I heard him not as word, but as rhythm. Then, a line later, I remember nothing. I am not who writes this. I am the ghost of what the rift wishes I had been. Her name appears only once, then twice, then never again. Witnesses across Idrin 7 began recounting people who weren't like they used to be, not changed in mood, not mutated, simply recast. A husband who was once a miner now spoke like a scholar. A mechanicus adept whose limbs were augmetic since birth now wept at phantom itches in fingers she no longer remembered losing. Some whispered that it was a mercy, that the rift didn't destroy, it revised, smoothed edges, pulled pain into abstraction, made the unbearable ... forgettable. A mother whose children were buried beneath the crushed domes of a Hab-collapsed sector was asked how many children she had. She smiled gently, eyes bright, and said, "None. But I dream of them sometimes. 2 boys, or maybe 3. I'm not sure. Isn't that funny?" The warp did not roar. It did not scorch or shred or tear. It remembered, and its memory was not kind, because it did not remember you as you were. It remembered you as it felt you. Should have been ... so it began to write. A captain of the Planetary Defense Force found himself issuing orders with words he'd never learned, doctrines that no manual taught. His men followed, because they remembered learning them, though no one could agree where or when. Combat formations collapsed into rituals. Ammunition was loaded in patterns that formed glyphs across the battlefield. Seen only from orbit, meaningful only to something else. The rift was not just a hole. It was a mirror, a reflective distortion that didn't show what you were, but what you could be. If memory was optional and identity was malleable, names lost weight, faces became options. Families disassembled and reassembled with the grace of misremembered dreams. The final report from the inquisitorial observer attached to Idrin 7's surface team included a single phrase repeated 9 times. "I am not myself." He signed it, not with his inquisitorial seal, but with the sigil of a man who died 50 years prior, his mentor, whose bones were interred on Terra. The signature matched perfectly. On the 7th day, Vox channels broadcast laughter in dozens of dialects. Not cruel, not mocking. Familiar. People heard themselves, or versions of themselves, laughing not in joy or despair but in release. The warp did not seek to destroy them. It sought to know them better than they knew themselves, and that knowing recursive, without beginning or end meant rewriting. A field scribe, tasked with inventorying refugees, found she could no longer write names. Every time she tried, the stylus slid toward different glyphs. Sometimes they were patterns, sometimes diagrams. Once, she drew a perfect map of a city that didn't exist. It looked like Idrin's 7 but more symmetrical, more balanced, more chosen. And then she drew her own face on every corner. The last record from her station read, "I'm not forgetting, I'm being remembered by something else." Identity did not collapse. It loosened enough to let something else in. Not possession, participation, as if the rift was coathering every soul, not to ruin, to understand. And in that understanding, edit, asterisk. The final report did not arrive on time, not because of delay, interference, or failure, but because no one requested it. Idrin V was, by then, no longer a destination, no longer a duty, no longer anything. Somewhere in the void between Segmentum Obscurus and the pale stars, a data archive cipher flickered into existence within the Noctis-class registry vessel Omnis. It did not trigger alerts. No fleet beacon recognized it, no astropath registered its transmission. It appeared inside a deep maintenance cogitator during routine file deduplication, perfectly filed, perfectly formatted, in an index sequence that had never been generated. Entry title, Idrin V. Status, unmade verification level. N, a threat level. Unbound action, observation only, that was all. No casualty list. No planetary loss declaration. No exterminatus order. Just a word in made. The scribe who discovered the entry, Lex Mechanic Old Tarnus, at first assumed corruption. He cross-referenced the coordinates. No planetary signature. The segmentum charts listed nothing. No orbital trail. No gravitational echo. The ship's own logs noted that it had once stopped at a refueling station adjacent to Idrin 7's system, but that system now bore a different designation. Unconfirmed Volume 33 Black Null. There was no such class of volume. He submitted an incident query. The machine replied in kind. Query denied. Object never verified. He searched deeper. Redundant storage. Ghosted memory. The inquisitorial relay chain. In a back-threaded flicker across a forbidden server stack, he found a phrase buried in memory failed verification checksum. It wasn't that Idrin V had been destroyed, it had been untethered, not removed from space, removed from certainty. There were images, screening bleeding at the edges, streets coiled like thoughts, hives that turned in on themselves, a moon that casts no pull, but none of them held metadata. Time codes faded into symbol, faces melted into texture. No individual could be confirmed. No datum could be sourced. It was as if the planet had once been dreamed, and then, quietly, the dream had ended, but the residue remained, and something watched the residue. Lex Tarnus submitted a request for clarity. A simple thing. The coordinates of Idrin 7, as listed in any pre-M41 archive. The system returned only one sentence. This entry is being observed. He paused, not because he understood, but because he felt something shift behind his eyes. Not pain, attention. He reread the original entry. Not destroyed, not evacuated, not purged, unmade, not a verdict, a state of having once been possible, and now being something else. He pulled his gaze from the screen. He looked at his own reflection in the monitor's darkened glass. For a moment, the reflection did not move with him. Then it did. He whispered the word aloud, unmade, and something whispered back, not in sound, in meaning, somewhere deep within the Noctis-class vessel. A cogitator blinked that had no assigned power source. A servitor stopped its movement, mid-task, and began weeping coolant. The Mechanicus noticed none of it. No alarms triggered, no anomalies logged, because anomalies are defined only by comparison, and there was no longer a record of what normal was. On a shelf in a vaulted archive beneath Terra's deepest memory banks lies a volume marked UNC. It bears the sigil of a suborder, long dissolved. It has no lock. It has no title. Inside, only a single sheet of parchment. One sentence, handwritten in perfect script. I dreamed of a world where names meant nothing, and still they called mine. And beneath it, unsigned AGLYPH. Not chaos, not imperial, not Xenos, just a curve, a turning, a suggestion of recursion. The planet did not burn, it did not fall, it did not defy. It simply, detached from time, from record, from context, from self. It was not erased, it was ONWITNESSED. And what cannot be witnessed cannot be remembered. What cannot be remembered cannot be mourned, and what cannot be mourned, may still be watching from inside the space where stories end and something else begins.